Camera's rolling.
Firstly, thank you for the privilege of letting us share this time with you and to capture your stories. It's a real honour for us. I know that we're here today for the kaupapa, that is Te Ata Whai Aroha. But before we get there, I'd really love to know who you are and where you come from and what makes you the person you are today. So can we take it right back?
Right.
Tell me about your childhood. Where did you grow up? Who did you grow up with? What was it like?
Okay. Well, my name's Nancy Te Awhimate, and if you're from Waimana, you'd call me Kero Tate. And my parents were Hori and Waitangi Tate. I'm one of 19 children to my parents, and I'm somewhere in the middle there. But I was raised by my great-grandmother from birth. She would have been in her late 80s, like 86, when she took me to live with her in Te Urewera, in a little place called Waimana. And so, and without my parents' knowledge or permission, actually. So she had moved in with my parents when my mother was pregnant with me, and stayed around until she had me, and stayed a bit longer until I'd bonded with her, so that I guess the, what would you call it, the the taking of me would be just a smooth process, if I could, for want of a better word. And so I, from that day on, never met my parents until I was 11 here in Te Arawa. So I had no idea that I was Te Arawa, so I am Te Arawa and Tūhoe. So, so I didn't really know any of my siblings either until much later than 11. What else can I say about that particular, part of my life was that, so my great-grandmother was my whole world, so I was literally raised by a village, her people, in Te Urewera. And so apart from her and her peers, I guess that was my whole world. So there were no other children, unless they were being raised by their grandparents or great-grandparents. So I was kind of that child that was not a loner, but kept isolated. I don't know whether isolation is the right word either, because I never felt that. I always felt absolute inclusion in everything that my great-grandmother did. And when you look at her age, I had no concept of age either, so I just thought it was absolutely normal to be raised by an old lady. And we resided in her husband's, my great-grandfather's marae. We lived inside the meeting house, walked to the river each day for bathing, and still, I guess, like not many, but like some of us, cooked over an open fire and a dirt floor kitchen, and so on, which is not, I guess, uncommon, for a lot of people, but for myself, it was normal, absolutely normal. I guess that's about it. So that's my earlier life.
It's pretty beautiful. I can see your visuals as you're describing walking down to the river each day and cooking over a fire. For people who don't understand the concept of the kuia coming to get you, can you explain a little bit more about?
Sure. Now, my mother is her father, or my great-grandmother's son, died at a very young age, and my mother was about 14, 15 at the time, and her father had arranged or promised that she would live with her aunties, his sisters, who lived in the Waimana Valley, and she would go back there and take up her role, which is the role I ended up with. And but she never did. Her mother, bypassed Waimana and took her back to live in Ruatoki with my grandmother's people. And so my mother never ever returned to Waimana. She met and married my dad, I think she was in her 20s, and never ever returned. So that when I was taken, I'm not sure whether it was to fill that role, but it certainly was, to go to Waimana to live with my mother's people for that period of time. And my great-grandmother was, I guess, ready also to hand down a lot of the knowledge that she possessed. She had other children who were much older. She had her first lot of children to Maipi, who was murdered up at Maunga Pōhatu during the invasion of Rua's establishment. And so when my great-grandmother was left with those children and as a widower, the chief of Waimana at the time asked for her hand in marriage and that he would take care of her first lot of children. So she had another lot of children, tūrakuraku, and but none of them were raised by her because the chief had decided that she was to just, I guess, live the chief's wife's life and whatever that means, and she would take up all the duties of the chief's wife. So her children was raised by the extended whānau and the iwi, tamakai moana. And so along I came, and I think at that time my great-grandfather had passed, and so I can only assume that she was ready to actually teach someone and hand knowledge down. And she did it in a way that I had no idea, actually. I just thought I was just being the child that listened and respected those tikanga on the marae and, literally in the death house. So my great-grandmother had attained the years where she was to be responsible for tūpāpaku in the iwi, tamakai moana. And so we were always first there and sat in the death house throughout the time of any tangi. And so that was my life from about this high until today.
Can you describe that, what that's like, the death house?
Oh, the death house. I was very, very comfortable around death, around tūpāpaku, around people who were very ill. I guess my name, Te Awhima Te Cicero. So, yes, from a very early age, as far back as I can remember, I sat next to a body in the death house, next to a coffin, because my great-grandmother adopted that role. And so that I would watch their practices inside of a death house and how it would be set up, because it was a temporary shelter, not what you see today, but it was a temporary shelter which would be taken down and everything burnt. So the hay that was used and the building materials would all be burnt after that. So that was the sort of environment the death house was at that time. And so I would be taken through, would it be, not realising that I was learning everything while she was hanging the photos in a particular way, in a particular order for every tūpāpaku that lay in the death house, and how the cloaks were laid and how the taonga were placed on the coffin, or if it wasn't a coffin, how they would be placed, and what photo went where in order of whakapapa or genealogy. And being encouraged to abstain from eating throughout the whole of the tangi, whether it be 3 or 4 days. And, when I say abstain from eating, so you would have your first meal, say, at 5 in the morning, and your final meal, your next meal wouldn't be until late at night. So you didn't eat during the day or during the time when manuhiri were coming onto the marae. And so I learnt that from a very early age, and I sat and was disciplined and that, and just stayed with my great-grandmother. So whatever she did and wherever she went, I went as well. So if you could imagine that.
Someone's got a phone that I can just hear.
There's like a train notification. Someone said
I feel like it's
a
over
phone
there.
or something.
Oh, it's probably my phone.
It's
Or a horn.
probably the. I think it is.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Oops. Sorry.
Quick hair check.
Oh, that's my fault. I thought I had turned it off.
All good.
I'm going to fix your hair.
Oh, yeah. Can't have my hair out of place.
On the roll now. Still rolling. Just for your time code real quick.
Is that enough? No.
19,081.
Where?
Sure.
I think for me, the real powerful imagery of you sitting by your nan and just by osmosis learning all of this stuff is just incredible. Tell me about the whare mati, because is that a tūhoi thing, right? Or is it a waimana thing?
It's a two-way thing. I think it was maybe other iwi as well. But what I can say to you about that, when I say it's a two-way thing, I don't think it's just, a two-way thing. Because during those years of being with my great-grandmother, we didn't just stay in two-way for tangihanga. We moved, we would go to whānau Apanui, Ngāpuhi, Kahungungu, ki Ngātipuro, ki Te Arawa. And so we would go to some that were already, temporary shelters. And also, but I'm not sure about the arrangement inside. But if I can recollect that some of those times that we did go, and I would go in the whare mate with her, say to whānau Apanui, I would always look around to see how the photos were hung and whether the females were at the feet of the coffin and the males were hanging up. So there were little things that I would look and observe when I went to any other tangihanga. And also I had to be really disciplined as well. My great-grandmother would not allow me to be, to even, what would I say, to question anything. Because, one of the things that happened would be on the trip to a particular iwi, she would explain things, how that iwi did things, what their kawa was, what their tikanga was around Tūpāpaku, and only about around Tūpāpaku. So understanding how to sit and be inside of someone's whare mate, know your place, in other words. And so there were times then we would go to Tainui and, so the rituals in Tainui were very, he hōhonu, he rite tonu ki tō kāinga. And so I just was always in awe, and I'm sorry to say this, but, you can be in awe around death, but just about the care and the love that is, that people give to their tūpāpaku and to their, to their loved one. So that those were the things I observed. And how wahine or kuia sat in the whare mate. There was no way that they would look up and look to see who was coming in. Their heads were always bowed. And there was a time when they would lift their heads up and look. And it was only when it was time to greet, when they would come around and greet. So those are the observations in my childhood that I saw and respected. And so, yes, long before we would go to a tangi, my kuia would sit in the meeting house. We would sit in the meeting house. And we lived on our own in that meeting house, we had nothing but a kapok mattress in the corner, so there was no mirror or dressing table or whatever. We had a steel chest in the corner of the meeting house, which my belongings were placed, along with the cloaks and the flag and so on. So nothing tapu about my clothes, I'm afraid. So anyway, so that was it. My routines were from meeting house, whare, death house, meeting house, death house, meeting house, death house. why I say meeting house, death house is because she would never go in the front door of a wharekai. So no matter what. When manuhiri were called in to eat, my great-grandmother wouldn't walk in the front door. She would either avoid going in, or she would ask if she could go around the back and enter through the back door. I can't explain to you why she did that. I have no idea, but it used to get on my nerves. But excuse me, had to have a bit of fun. But she was very strict around that. So growing up with her, I realised just how important it was to support grieving families and, to be caring and loving toward them during their time of grief. To ensure that they knew what tikanga was and how to pass that on without intimidating them in a non-threatening way. So whenever, so you'd have a group of people who would come into the death house or to wharimate, and they would often be unsure as to which way to go, which way do we go to shake hands, and do we go out now, do we go here, do we go to the pie, So she would always tap me, and that was to indicate to them to come this way or go that way. And when the call was made to go for a kai, I would indicate for them to go, and so on and so on. Or if I had to get up, then I would get up and show them where the water was and why, and that, why they would wash their hands, etc., etc. Just little things like that. So I guess her teachings were not so much sit down and learn this, but sit down and observe. And so a lot of that was just being immersed in your culture, immersed in your tikanga, immersed in kawa. So, and she had a band of, can I call them a band? There was always a group at every marae that we went to, which were within the rohe of Tūhoe, and they were responsible for my care. So whichever marae we went to, if it was within Ngai Tūhoe, there would be 2 or 3 women who would come over and get me so that I could not so much relieve her, but it would be to ensure that I was okay, that I probably had enough to eat or so on and so on. And that was outside of the base marae, which I call my base marae.
Is there a title for you? It feels like, when you're describing it, I almost feel like whenever you went somewhere that people knew that you were
part of
something special that had to be looked after. Do you know what your role was, or what people deemed you to be?
I actually didn't see I didn't see myself as important or special. I just, I really couldn't explain that. I just, I guess until I was much older that I realised what my great-grandmother was doing, that I guess she wanted her world, her I don't know, someone to retain it and maintain it and pass it on. Because none of my aunts or grandaunts, her children, they were well into their 70s and 80s when I arrived. And they weren't doing the karanga or anything like that. They were all sort of like, oh, I'm going in the kitchen, or, where am I? And so that role was always just, I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice as to where I would be or what I would be doing. They would just literally, when she passed, they would just go, okay, girl, go and do the karanga because there's so-and-so coming on. I'm like, are you kidding me? Your fellas are in your 80s, and, And they said, well, Nan didn't teach us. She taught you. And she didn't actually teach me. I just observed. And I think there's a difference. When you're immersed in a culture, it's like metamorphosis, I suppose. I don't know. You just are. You're just that person inside of your culture. And you just, you don't realise how privileged you are and how fortunate you are. I mean, every Friday night well, I guess every young person was doing other things and every young girl was playing with friends. I didn't have any young friends. My friends were my great-grandmother's peers. And they were all at the same age. And every Friday night they would arrive for karakia, and 6 o'clock, before the 6 o'clock bell, they would all arrive and they'd take up their places in the meeting house. And there would be about 40 of them, like kuia and korua, and koeke. They would all take up their places inside of our meeting house. And I would be sitting in there because, I thought, oh, yay, they're all here, I can have a bit of fun. Because they were fun. And they would be all kuia moko, and her age group, and they would just discuss politics, the social welfare of the people, and this would go on all night. And then in the morning they'd have hapati, and then they'd have a hakari at lunchtime, and then they'd all go back to their relevant, or their, marae, and we'd be left on our own again. But that was the most exciting time for me. Every week on a Friday, 40 plus korua kuia would be joining my kuia and I in our meeting house. And I can tell you, we didn't have carpet. We didn't have, you had to walk to the river if you wanted to have a bath and so on and so on. But it was fun, it was fun. And I got to learn so much because it wasn't just her knowledge, it was their knowledge as well. And they were prepared to share it with me. So that's what I'm saying when I say I was so privileged and so fortunate. I didn't realise it then, but I sure realise it today. And, yeah.
Sounds like a wonderful childhood, and I'm sure at the time you probably wished for other things, but retrospectively it sounds glorious.
Maybe when I was 15.
You talked about you came over to Te Arawa when you were 11 for the
Yes.
first time. Tell me about that.
Okay, can I just go back a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so my whāngai mum, who I adopted, she didn't adopt me, I adopted her. She was my great-grandmother's daughter, so my grand-aunt, and my grandfather's sister. And she died when I was about 7. And so she lay on the marae that I grew up on. And so I sat in that death house in that wharimate by his side, and my great-grandmother sat on the other side. And that's really important when you have one side just to yourself, So it's kind of a privilege thing, what I thought deemed important. And so one day a manuhiri came from here, from Te Arawa, and And 2 people, a few of the women moved forward into the wharimate and took up their place and sat down at the foot of my grand-aunt's. Her name was Te Oriwa. My grand-aunt's, or my mum, whom I called my mum, sat at her foot of her coffin, and they, haupa kura te mahi, really, really wailed. So I looked at these women and thought, they must be kin. And there was a man standing just outside, kind of big man. And Wereti ki te Pākehā. I thought, wow, he's been standing there for a long time. And I know the kind of processes, why people stand longer. You just know that there's a connection because they stood longer. The rest have moved back to be seated. And so the other women moved to the side and this one woman stayed there and the man stood outside in front of the wharimate. And I didn't know who they were. But anyway, when the call came for them to go for a kai, the man waited for the woman. And he went back, of course, to take up his seat. But then when the call came for them to go in for a kai, the man came across and waited for the woman who was wailing, really, heartbroken. And then they both walked in together. And I watched these 2 people walking into the wharekai. And I thought, but in the wharimate, there is no casual conversation. There is no such thing as who's that, who was that. Those are the questions you do not ask. if they sit in a particular way, if they come into the death house, if they stand like that, they're kin. That's all you need to know. You can tell by the way they proceed, sit, and embrace. So that was that. I was 7. And one day I found out that I had parents. I don't know how I found out, but anyway, I found out. And I just threw a tantrum and said to my great-grandmother that I was going to see my parents. And she said, she just never answered me, you know, she just went really quiet. And she weaved every day, my great-grandmother. And I said, and I want to go this next school holidays. And nothing said. And all she said was, oh, well, I'll have to go and buy you some new clothes. And I said, okay. And my grand-uncle, she'd gone across to talk to my grand-uncle. Of course, they arranged whatever, and before I knew it, we were travelling here to Horohoro, to where I live now, to Kapinga. I wasn't known as Parikarangi then, because my uncle, Bubby Hill, always said it was Parikarangi. And I arrived, and my great-grandmother, she was really quiet. She never said a word. All she said was, well, you've got some new clothes. And so the car parked up at the bottom of the farm, and I jumped out excited, you know, and my English was very limited, you know, so that was my first language. And said goodbye to her. My grand-uncle said, oh, well, I hope you have a good holiday. And anyway, there was a young woman swinging on the gate down the bottom, you know, and I looked over to her and I said, oh, to my great-grandmother, I said, Koe tērā Pākehā. You know, who's that Pākehā swinging on the gate? And she said, oh, koe nā tō tuakana. And I looked at her and I went, she can't be my tuakana. She looked a bit like Maria. And this beautiful young woman, I said, is she really my sister? Oh my gosh, you know, she's so beautiful. She's so fair. She's so... And I remember everything she had on. She had these green pedal pushers and a white poplin blouse. And, you know, she's just so pretty. I just never seen anyone so pretty in my life. And she came over, hugged my nan and hugged my grand-uncle. They got in the car and drove away, and she came over and hugged me and said, I'm your sister, Wariti, and I've been sent down by Mum and Dad to come and get you. And so, you know, I'm excited because they're kōrero Māori here. So she speaks Māori. And so her and I walk up to the house, and suddenly I become a little bit nervous because I can see a few people. Obviously my te arawa cousins and, you know, my first cousins and so on. And I'm not sure now, you know, about this holiday. But anyway, my parents are inside. They'd prepared a hākari for my welcome. And there must have been about 20 or 30 people there, along with my uncles and aunties. And I walked into the house, and I'd never met my parents before. And those were the two people that were at the tangi. My father and my mother. Anyway, I'd come for 2 weeks holiday. I lasted a day. The second day I wanted to go home because it was so different. It was just so different. And, you know, I had no idea that people slept on beds like that, had a bathroom. Just the food was different. You know, I literally ate food that walked off the table. My great-grandma and I ate food that they could walk off the table. It had a life of its own. And I was suddenly introduced to this beautiful, gourmet meals. I can say gourmet now because I understand what that is. And that's exactly what it was. I mean, my mother was, people said I looked like my mother. And I looked at her. I took an instant like to my father, like absolute love for my father. It was instant. With my mother, it took me a little while. I don't know why. Anyway,
Can I have a drink?
yeah, can I have a drink? Sorry. How are we doing?
Good.
Sorry, I didn't mean to break
Whoever's
down.
got the story.
Thank God I didn't put mascara on. Yeah, I guess those certainly the food was different, and I knew it was going to take a bit of getting used to. And that night, my mother ran a bath, and I'd never bathed with anyone, let alone in hot water, warm water. It was just all so new. And like I said, I was just amazed that there was this huge bed in the room, and we were going to sleep on it, and I was so used to sleeping on the floor, and just the eating routines just totally different, and suddenly I just wanted to go home. Yeah, but I met my parents for the first time officially, and I never saw them again till I was 19, I think. But I didn't meet all my siblings, but I did meet a lot of my whānau who were there at the time, and yeah, But I remember my father. This I have to mention. He saw me looking at the food, and I think he understood that maybe some of the food I didn't recognise, or didn't know. Plus, I didn't know how to eat with a knife and fork either. And so he reached down into the cupboard under the sink and pulled out this jar of toroi or whakamara. And I was like, hey, hey, that's something I recognise. It's almost had a life of its own as well, And so I guess maybe that was the instant, to my father, because, for my father rather, because he had presented something that I recognised and I could relate to. It was like, yay. But I can tell you that, that night I slept with my big sister. I loved that. And but I prayed that I could go home the next day. Yeah, and you won't believe it. My great-grandmother's walking up the road in her, different slippers, and holy skirt, and, and just like she always did, or just her gardening clothes, I'd say, And so she would have been 96 then, around 90s, in her mid-90s. And she was walking up, and I was out of that house like a shot. You couldn't stop me. And I said, Nan, and she says, I knew you weren't going to last. But I didn't want to say any of that to you because you would never, ever hear me. And, she must have stayed for maybe 20 minutes. We didn't stay long when she came. And we both just went back to Waimana and continued our life of, meetings every Friday night. And
Did it change somewhat for you, even though you've only had a day away from your life? Did you see yourself a bit differently, or did anything shift for you? Excuse me.
I saw myself in my cousins, if I could just say that, I mean, you know, I grew up where there was no mirror, and so I never really saw myself at any time, you know, in a mirror. I did see myself in a river that flowed by, you know, so that was the picture I had, you know. It was kind of, what would you call, wavy. So that was my mirror. And, yeah, so we never, you know, there are no mirrors in a meeting house. And I don't know, for whatever reason, my great-grandmother, you know, just never ever. I remember asking her, I says, I wanted her to say, you know, I remember asking her why she took me, you know, and, you know, ka pātai au ki aia. And I wanted her to say, because I was a beautiful baby, you know. I really did. I wanted her to say that. And I'm sitting there, you know, she goes, nā te mea, te hao, te mara mai, te rere pēnei, te wai, you know, are you kidding me? You know, like, because the river was flowing this way and the moon was at this, and, you know, whatever, and I couldn't believe it, and I just didn't want to hear all that. Like, she never once said that I was this beautiful, beautiful girl, or beautiful baby, and which was good for me, actually. I can tell you that.
When did you step into your own role as, like your great-grandmother? When did you step into that role?
I guess when I was about, if I was to say immediate, I don't know whether that would make sense, because inside of the whare mate, she would show me how to take care of our tūpāpaku, what to do, how to talk to a tūpāpaku. You know, ngā karakia āhei ana e tikana ki te uhi ki runga te tūpāpaku. So I guess that was immediate. And I could do that from age 5, you know, without even thinking twice about it. How ki te whakamau kākahu ki runga i te tūpāpaku, me pēhea te whāwhai te tūpāpaku, e rāhuatanga katoa o te whare mate. And her and her peers, there were 2 others, they would have rongoa already prepared. So that sat, you know, along the side of the death house, and they would just, you know, reach for it at times when it was required. You know, ka huri ana te tūpāpaku. So, you know, I was able to learn that by her side. And in terms of doing the karanga, well, you know, if I didn't listen to all my kuia doing it, then, you know, I guess she'd made the wrong choice. She'd picked the wrong baby. But one of the things that I will always, which is really important for me, is, you know, ko te mana o te tūpāpaku. Hey. That koia te mana o runga i te marae, takoto ana i runga i te marae, nōna te mana, whakahaere o runga i te marae. Katoa ngā āhuatanga, ngā tikanga, ko te tūpāpaku, te kaupapa. Kāre tuatu. So that is, you know, and that's what I learned. Nothing more, nothing less. Ko ngā kai ka hora i runga i ngā tēpu, mo te tūpāpaku te kaupapa. Kia whakamanahia te tūpāpaku mā ana kai, e hora ana i runga i te tēpu. Koe rā kāre taku kuia e kuhu ki te kai, e rā kai. Mā ngā manuhiri e rā kai. So nothing but the best for your tūpāpaku. The food. And so a practice that my Tūhoe people did have was that they would never go in the front door when the people were called in for a kai. So you had the whare mate only ate at night when the rest had finished eating. We would go in, then there was a table set for us, and we would go in and eat then, when no one else was about. So that kāre mātou e tirohia e kai ana. And the same with the early morning. We would eat long before everyone arrived to the marae, because we had remained in the death house. So koe rā te rere kia pia, o we te hao ngā tikana o tēnei rā. So Koi nei te kaupapa ko tō tūpāpaku, kāri tu atu. No one else, there's no one else more important than your tūpāpaku. And so for me growing up in that world is understanding that I have a role to play, and that is to ensure that this person lying in state is very dignified, is presented in a way that's very regal. So you're nothing but the best. And when you sit inside the wharemata, you're not there to talk to each other. You're there to grieve. You're to help the family who are coming in to grieve, to help them to mourn. You reach out to them. You make them feel comfortable. You're not there for any chit-chat or to catch up on last week because you didn't see each other. No. So my kuia who sat in that death house, it was a privilege to be in the death house. They were all disciplined. They were strict about protocols inside of the death house. So it was a privilege. So it was a privilege for me to grow in the death house. I wouldn't have it any other way, because it's a totally different life. It's one of humility. It's one of respect. It's one of, absolute mate aone ki te tangata. You look up because you know that they may be a bit unsure inside of the death house. So your job is to ensure that they're okay. Haramai, eno. Nukumai. Vacate a piece of, place for them so they can sit. So koe rā ngā huatanga roto te wharemate. Make sure that when you look at the tūpāpaku, that everything's presented in such a way that, and if it's the tūpāpaku starting to turn, well then you've got to make a decision as to what happens next. Koe rā katoa ngā huatanga o reira. Kāre koe kai, kāre koe inu wai, kare kai. You have to learn to abstain from that 5 o'clock kai to that 9 o'clock kai. Nothing in between. Because I need the kaupapa.
Differences from today?
A few differences. And I think rightly so. It's, I don't know how to explain it, but I still try to adopt the practice of having a kai first thing in the morning, going down to the tangi and sitting there by the tūpāpaku, and then, having a kai later. If they don't have a special table, then I'll have something later at my own home. But try and sit there and still. I think the key word in there is stillness. Being able to be still for that time. And I henui nā rereki. But I just put it down to I could see I was fortunate. Not everyone's going to be able to know all this and do all this. It's not possible. I was groomed into the role. It just went from one step to another. So from the wharemate, kaikaranga, and I did do my time in the kitchen, as well. And then, so there is this graduation process that you go through. So, yeah.
I've got so many questions I want to ask you. What time do you have to leave by?
That message, was about they'll wait for me. So, kei te pai, I'm happy to...
Yeah, I would love...
Kei te pai.
I'd love to carry on because I feel like some of the mahi that we're doing with Te Ata Whaiaroha is trying to bring back some of those practices that you were raised in. Am I right? Do you know any of that stuff, like some of the more natural processes? I
think it was just also having that information for those perhaps who may want to have some of those practices, within their own, with their tūpāpaku as well. There's much more to it than just, but okay.
Actually, I want to ask a couple other questions.
Okay.
Just thinking back to when you talked about originally the wharimata used to be burnt after burial, you'd go and burn everything. What was do you remember how that changed from being to proper structures now. I know that there's actual whares there now. They don't build a thing anymore, do they? Do you remember the graduation of that change?
Yeah, just sort of. I think at one time the men thought that it would be a good idea for us to be very warm now, and to be a lot more comfortable out in the whare mate. So those changes came with that, the next generation taking over on the pai. That my aunties and uncles now have, progressed to the pai and running the marae. So those 80-year-olds and those 90-year-olds have long, passed. And so they've come in and thought, well, I think we make them comfortable and, and take away the hay bales and let's make something a bit more permanent and kia mahanai mate. Of course, I was the objector, but, I was 1 against 50 or something, I think. But, so the changes happened over a period of, probably in the late 70s, maybe 70s. Because, to I don't understand about the comfortable thing because, when you're disciplined and you've been, you will sit there and you'll handle it. And there was always, if it stormed or if there was a storm or whatever, you would lift the tūpapaku and take it into the meeting house, And so there were those options. But I think it was about men who wanted us to be comfortable. Not so much us, our wahine, but they could see that, And perhaps they were married to women who were now taking up their place in the whare mate, and so they wanted their wives to be comfortable. All very well for myself, but I was sort of used to it and not worried about it. And did that answer your question?
I'd love to know a little bit more about your great-grand. So you came back from the holiday and you lived it the rest of her life. You stayed with her?
Yes, apart from going to college, which I would board with my uncle and come back to her. Yes, I did. And she was 18 when I died. Oh, when she died. I was 18 when she died, And then I just continued on being in the whare mate and taking up my role on the marae and, just not always making the decisions, but always particular about the whare mate. I never worried about anything else except the whare mate, because that was what I was groomed to do, and the meeting house. So they go hand in hand, both, what would you call it, enhances the other. So, the whare nui is there to do a job for the whare mate, and the whare mate is there to do a job for the whare nui. And so those jobs are very separate. So.
What would you like for the practices to be like current day? Have you got an ideal situation how we blend the old with the new?
Well, I think for me, just that care and that love for the bereaved, for the whānau or the bereaved, I think that's really important. And the options that are available, to share that kind of information, because, if you have a look, it's over the years that we have been literally, coerced or, to use a coffin and so on, whereas once upon a time, I saw a lot of my people just lying on a mattress, not in a coffin. Ka tākai hea wakukui. So there's some beautiful things that could happen for whānau and they're bereaved through Te Ata Whaiaroha. Just the knowledge that we have, that, the rest of our rōpū have, that, ki te manaaki i te whānau, ki te tia ki pai i te tūpāpaku, and to make things available to them and information available to them that was never there before. And I think, for me anyway, that's really important, is the love and care of the family, of the bereaved, and for the bereaved as well. Like I said, that was the most important person on our marae, during that 3 or 4 days. Ko tēnei, you know.
One thing I did read that you had said somewhere was talking about funeral poverty and the amount of money that people are expected to pay if they don't have this knowledge. Did you want to say something about that?
Do you want to rephrase that?
Yeah, I think basically, I guess what I'm saying is that nowadays when someone passes away, there's just an expectation that you've got to go and get a coffin, you've got to go to there's all of the, you don't know that there are other resources available, and people are actually putting themselves into debt,
Aye.
great debt, to bury their loved ones, which just puts added stress
Aye.
on whānau forever, for generations. So.
I know that there will be other members of our rōpū who will talk to that. I personally, I couldn't be sort of more hea te kupu, waimarie, waimarie, to be part of this trust and to know what's available for our whānau, to help them through not so much to help them through the finances, but to actually make it a lot easier for them to manage, ngā whakahaere mo te tūpāpaku, the things that are made available to them now, and just the knowledge. I tell you that just the knowledge is more than sufficient to help whānau, through that time, costs, hanga me pēhea, and who to contact, etc., and just, I think that for myself who grew up in another world, I guess I could say that, Is that okay? I would never have thought that this would, that we could have this available for whānau. Even I am guilty of being at a time when, I've lost so many whānau, during the time when none of this information was available. Like I had no idea about, I just went along with a funeral director who said, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. And, the law says you do this and you do that. Well, ko wai kāre whai tērā, So I'm like, oh, okay, and so on. Oh, you have to get a coffin. No idea, Kāre mohio, but today, rereke, and that's what really makes me so happy that whānau have a choice. Whānau can have choices.
Beautiful. Anyone have any questions? And I know that she's got lots of stories that. Got any? Do you have anything?
Have a question, Catherine?
I'm too full to speak, Nancy.
Pa?
Thank you.
Oh, kia ora.
Wow. I was looking forward to interviewing you today, but I wasn't aware of what I was going to hear, and it was quite beautiful. I can see your life, the way in which you speak. I can visualise you with your career and all of those people out there in Waimana. Thank you for sharing that with us today.
Kia ora.
Ngā mihi, ka pai.